Tonight, a dog is shot dead after attacking its owner, a neighbour and police. The bulldog-style pet was tasered before armed officers were called out and forced to fire.
There was a lot of commotion outside, a lot of shouting, dog hysterical. They tried to approach it, they weren't having it. They tried to tase it, that didn't work. And eventually the armed police had to be called and they put it down, 4 shots.
Also making the headlines, living with the lasting impact of the pandemic. A former nurse with long COVID says frontline staff were unprepared and she wants answers.
Getting back on track, ScotRail say their network is almost up and running again after being battered by storms Isha and Jocelyn.
And tonight's sport comes live from Easter Road as Hibs welcome Rangers in the Scottish Premiership.
I'm Kellyanne Woodland in Edinburgh.
And I'm John Mackay in Glasgow. This is the STV News at 6. Good evening. Police have shot and killed a dog after it attacked its owner, a neighbour and one of the officers called out to deal with the animal. Armed police were called to Hamilton last night following reports of a large dog attacking people.
Its owner was rushed to the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital in Glasgow to be treated for serious injuries. Police were at the scene for much of the day, including a specialist forensics team. Well, our reporter Brandon Cook joins us now. And Brandon, clearly a very distressing incident for locals.
Yeah, Kellyanne, there was still a heavy police presence here until about half an hour ago when officers took away the cordon which stretched right along this row of houses. We've been speaking to locals right throughout the course of the day, both on and off camera, and what we've got is a real sense of shock at the events which unfolded here yesterday evening. And still, 24 hours on, the man suspected to be the owner of the dog is still in hospital and he has serious injuries. Shortly before 5:30 last night, and this man is seen frantically limping into a local shop. He'd just been attacked by a large bulldog. The frightening ordeal started on a street around 150 yards away. He was left with minor injuries and sent to hospital. The dog then mauled another man here on Tinto Views shortly after. The victim is believed to be the owner. Tonight he's fighting for his life in hospital. The out-of-control dog then turned on police and was shot dead by armed officers.
About 10 to 5, there was a lot of commotion outside, a lot of shouting, dog hysterical. I went to my window and I could see 2 men fighting over the dog. One was being bitten by the dog, that wasn't the owner. And they managed to separate, but the dog then latched onto his owner and just wouldn't let go after that. And eventually I phoned the police. Other people probably phoned the police as well. And when they arrived, they tried to approach it, they cleared the area, tried to approach it, they weren't having it. They tried to tase it, that didn't work. And eventually the armed police had to be called and they put it down, 4 shots.
Police have called it a distressing incident. Nearby neighbours say the commotion was frightening.
Just the police in the neighbour's garden, running up and down, shields, and then the armed response showed up. It's horrible. Again, you just never know what's potentially going to happen.
Forensic teams continued investigations well into this afternoon, but there's no wider threat to the public. The dog's body was taken for specialist veterinary assessments. Police say it wasn't possible to establish its specific breed. Residents are split on whether it was an XL bully.
Hopefully it's not something that we have to deal with in the future. I think on that note we do need to look at the legislation around ownership and breeds, particularly in relation to dangerous dogs. And it's obviously not been confirmed as an XL bully breed, but I think we do need to look at the type of dogs that are capable of causing this damage and the ownership and breeding of kind of dogs like that.
The Scottish Government announced last week it was working towards restrictions on XL bullies, replicating measures introduced in England at the end of last year. There's no date yet for when the measures will come into force.
Scotland's already got dog control notices in place with their local authority, so that is not in place in England and Wales, so there are powers within local authority. If you have a dog locally or you're worried about a dog's behaviour, you can report it to the local authority and they have the powers to muzzle it or put it on a lead.
The circumstances of last night's incident will be referred to the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner, a violent attack which traumatised everyone involved. Brandon Cook, STV News, Hamilton.
A leading epidemiologist has told the UK COVID inquiry the closure of schools was handled badly and was baffled they shut again during the second wave. Professor Mark Woolhouse added the stay-at-home order was never necessary.
It comes as a former nurse with long COVID tells STV News frontline staff were unprepared for the pandemic and now she wants answers after losing her job, career and very nearly her home to the virus. Here's our political reporter Laura Alderman.
Before the pandemic, Cass didn't need this wheelchair to get around, but now can't leave the house without it. Whilst working as a nurse in April 2020, Cass caught COVID-19 and has never recovered.
Some days, for days on end, I won't get dressed because I just don't have the energy. It's ever-present fatigue. I've lost my job. I've lost my career. That's gone. My life has completely changed. The research into treatments that might get us back to being able to work, it's not there.
People with long COVID are watching the UK COVID-19 inquiry closely as it examines pandemic decision-making in Scotland.
I think the scientists have actually been fairly clear about that, about the advice they were being given. And it's really obvious that they acted far too late. It was too little, too late.
A point emphasised at the inquiry in Edinburgh today. Epidemiologist Professor Mark Woolhouse said he was raising the alarm to the then Chief Medical Officer Catherine Calderwood as early as January 2020, but he could not get her to listen.
Would you put all this very, as I say, fairly basic information together, and what you get is an unfolding catastrophe. And I think a lot of people simply couldn't get their heads around that. I think there was a general belief that we would lock down, perhaps for a few weeks, and somehow the thing would be over. Extraordinarily naive.
He also said schools stayed closed for far longer than necessary and was baffled by the decision to shut them down again in the second wave.
This is one of the aspects of the pandemic management that I really feel very strongly what we did to the children. And it would be bad enough if there was a detectable and measurable public health benefit to this, but there wasn't. This wasn't necessary, and we did it anyway.
What is undeniable, I think, is that the Scottish Government did far more, both in terms of this general notion of treating the public with respect and as a partner than the UK government did.
First Minister Humza Yousaf, who was Health Secretary for the latter part of the pandemic, is due to give evidence tomorrow. Laura Alderman, STV News, Edinburgh.
Rishi Sunak is facing calls from within his own party to stand down if the Conservatives are to avoid being massacred at the next general election. The attack came from a former cabinet colleague who accused Mr Sunak of uninspiring leadership and a failure to get what Britain needs.
The comments came before he had to head to the Commons to face Sir Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's questions. Our Westminster correspondent, Paris Goutsianis, has the latest.
Well, if you had a nagging feeling that something was out of place, something was missing, well, not to worry, order is restored because Conservative MPs are calling for the Prime Minister to resign once again. This time it's the former Cabinet Minister, Simon Clarke, saying the Tories need to ditch their leader for the third time since the last election if they're to avoid a massacre when we go to the polls later this year. No army of MPs has answered his call. 53 letters of no confidence would be needed to challenge Mr Sunak's position. Only 2 MPs have gone public so far. One thing Mr Clarke did achieve, a big cheer for the PM at the start of a noisy, bad-tempered and personal PMQs.
Mr Speaker, I love this quaint tradition where the more they slag him off behind his back, the louder they cheer in here. Keep it going.
This from a man who takes the knee, Mr Speaker, who wanted to abolish the monarchy, who still doesn't know what a woman is, right? And he doesn't want to talk about it, but this is the fact. He chose to represent a now proscribed terrorist group, Mr Speaker. He chose to campaign against the deportation of foreign national offenders.
In 2008, I was the Director of Public Prosecution, putting terrorists and murderers in jail. He was making millions betting on the misery of working people during the financial crisis.
Rowdy for sure. So what's behind this challenge to Rishi Sunak, Paris?
Well, there's some truth in Mr Clark's warning. The polls for the Tories are at their lowest level since the Prime Minister took over. Mr Sunak used to be more popular than his party, not anymore. And Tory MPs are looking nervously over their shoulder at the rise of the Reform Party in England, which is courting a certain Nigel Farage to be their next leader. The party says it will challenge in every UK constituency with its anti-immigration message. The risk to the Conservatives is that splits their vote, making it easier for Keir Starmer to walk through the door of number 10.
Paris at Westminster, thank you. The US rape suspect Nicholas Rossi has refused to appear at his latest court hearing. Utah's district court heard the American, who was extradited from Scotland earlier this month, would not appear by video link from prison. A new date has been set and a judge has said reasonable force may be authorised to compel his attendance.
A senior lawyer has warned plans to pilot juryless rape trials could lead to chaos, delay and disaster if more people leave the legal profession. The president of the Faculty of Advocates Criminal Bar Association told Holyrood's Justice Committee his members could not officially boycott the pilot, but added many are unhappy with the proposal.
As people are driven out of the profession, I talk about an outflux in my submissions. That's a reality. So you've got to be super careful with massive changes, that what you don't do is, with the best intentions, deliver chaos and delay and disaster.
A former sub-postmaster caught up in the Horizon scandal has had his wrongful conviction quashed. Robert Thompson was sentenced to 180 hours of community service amid claims of embezzlement in 2006.
Meanwhile, at the UK Horizon inquiry, one of the Post Office employees, whose job it was to investigate potential embezzlement, has said he still believes a Scottish sub-postmaster was guilty, despite being cleared following his death. Caitlin Hutchinson reports.
For my part in it, I'm humbly sorry.
An emotional apology from the man responsible for investigating a sub-postmaster who was wrongly convicted of embezzlement in 2010. The inquiry had to use Section 21 legal powers to compel Raymond Grant to turn up today.
I swear by Almighty God.
During his evidence, he said he still believed William Quorm was guilty of stealing money from his branch on North Uist, even though his conviction was overturned last year.
In my mind, I still think that Mr Quorm had a role to play in the loss of the money.
You remain of the view that he's guilty of the crime?
Yes, I do.
Despite the verdict of the High Court of Justiciary in Scotland?
Yes.
Was that amongst the reasons that you didn't regard this inquiry as a priority?
No.
Like so many postmasters across the country, Mr Quorm fell victim to the faulty IT software Horizon and was among the dozens of people who died before being cleared of any wrongdoing.
Won't do that. Alan. So now they want to close me down to shut me up.
The recent STV drama has been praised for provoking outcry and calls for justice, but there's still a long way to go.
You know, the inquiry has something in the region of 55 million documents there so they can actually go through. It's costing tens of millions of pounds for the inquiry to be covered. But ultimately, the purpose and the point is to get to the truth.
Today, former Cambus postmaster Robert Thompson received news that his own conviction has finally been quashed. Others are still waiting for exoneration. Caitlin Hutchison, STV News.
A grandfather could face jail after being accused of trespass in Dubai while visiting his daughter and granddaughter there. 74-year-old Ian McKellar, originally from Glasgow, had a police complaint filed against him after complaining to neighbours about their noisy party. His wife fears he wouldn't survive a stint in prison.
He is a devoted husband and he's absolutely devoted to his children and to his grandchildren. I spoke to him earlier today and he was broke down. He was in tears and And of course, there's just nothing I can do to help apart from talk. All we know is today, I believe, earlier today, he's been asked to attend the police station tomorrow.
ScotRail says most of its services have returned after severe disruption caused by Storm Jocelyn brought all trains to a halt. The storm caused limited damage but meant transport chaos for commuters, as Ollie Dickinson reports.
Back on track with Storm Jocelyn away and the majority of lines checked, most services across Glasgow and the west were up and running by mid-morning.
I was travelling from Edinburgh this morning. Well, I actually travelled to Edinburgh on the bus, and then luckily managed to catch that first train back from Haymarket there. So off to uni now, so I'm glad to make it back in time for class.
I'm just travelling today, and I'm trying to get to Hindland. The Hindland trains are off, so I need to get the subway to Partick.
I was hoping it's on, because obviously I had to travel to see my kids today, and I would have been very disappointed if I couldn't.
The return came, though, with a word of caution. It might take some time for timetables to fully return. Anyone with tickets dated for this week can use them on ScotRail trains up to and including Friday. Calmer seas meant Calmac has been able to restart the majority of its services, with passengers still being advised to check timetables. The ferry to Arran was one that returned, taking essential supplies across from the mainland. Meanwhile, in Larbert, all homes affected by a localised power cut have been reconnected via generators. Supply had been off since Sunday evening to around 350 homes after a tree fell and hit a substation, with works yesterday stopped due to the approaching Storm Jocelyn. Meanwhile, tributes have been paid to an 84-year-old man who died when the car he was travelling in struck a fallen tree during Storm Isha on Sunday. James Jimmy Johnston has been described as a much-loved and well-respected family man who left a lasting impression on all who had the privilege to have met him. Police are appealing for anyone with dashcam footage from the area or information to come forward. Ollie Dickinson, STV News.
The Glasgow Film Festival is celebrating its 20th anniversary with a special programme. The festival runs from the end of February at the GFT, screening more than 120 films.
It's really the sort of breeding ground for that new talent, so it's really important that people support and come and see something out with their comfort zone. Choose a film, you know, just come and see it. You'll probably discover something that's really amazing or a hidden gem.
Glasgow comes at such a really nice point in the year. It's it's February to March, it's the beginning of the year. There's so much exciting premieres that are happening, UK premieres, and it's really cool to be able to bring these to Glasgow especially, and the audiences that have been coming back year on year on year.
All right, time for all your sport now from Ronnie.
Yes, thank you, Kellyanne. A very good evening from Easter Road on a huge night of Premiership action as Hibs welcome Rangers. Nick Montgomery's men, fresh from that win over Forfar, will come into here with a bit of confidence, but they haven't beaten Rangers here in the league in the last 11 matches. For Philippe Clement's Rangers side, they come here and the main task is to cut the gap to leader Celtic at the top of the table. It could go down to 5 points if they win tonight, and they'll be confident. They haven't lost to Hibs in the league in the last 20 matches. Let's now hear from both managers.
We're a top team, a very, very good team since the new manager came in. They've been a little bit more probably aggressive and direct, if I would say that. But they've got some top players, and we got to be on our game tomorrow night. But at home, full crowd at Easter Road. We're really looking forward to getting out there and putting on a performance and giving a good account of ourselves.
They do it in a good way. You see a clear structure and an idea. It's one of the teams also in Scotland to do that. Not so many teams are doing that. So against the other teams, last couple of weeks, we showed the good things against teams who play in a low block and put a lot of balls forward. So this is a totally different game. So it's interesting for us also to see how we react.
And we do have some signing news from Hibs. They've announced in the last few hours that 26-year-old Luke Amos has joined the club on an 18-month deal. He'll be in the stands tonight for this huge match, which kicks off at 7:45. Now to other footballing news, and Stephen Naismith is praising the character of his side as they beat Dundee 3-2 last night. They were 2 goals down in the first half, and Naismith described the atmosphere as toxic, that after Jordan McGee and Lyle Cameron gave Dundee the lead. But an almighty second half fight back saw Hearts over the line after goals from Callum Ewanhoff, Dexter Lambasika and Utara Oda.
half-time, this place was toxic. It was toxic. The players understood it wasn't good enough. We knew it wasn't good enough. The fans made it known that it wasn't good enough. So you're in a really tough spot, and for us to come back and win's a really good strength for us to have. That's now the last twice here we've been 2-0 down, and we've taken points for both games, which probably wouldn't have happened in previous seasons.
Scott Brown says he's delighted by the ambition of his new club as he takes over as Ayr United's new head coach. The former Celtic captain joins the Honest Men on a deal until the summer of 2026, with the side sitting 7th in the table.
We're looking forward to it because the club's got an ambition. We've got ambition because we're young coaches, and now we're just thankful of the opportunity to get back in because we have got a good enough squad so far to maintain ourselves in this league, and it's about making sure that we take it one game at a time.
Finally, some rugby news. In Scotland, co-captain Finn Russell admits he'd never thought he'd be chosen to lead his country again. That after a controversial bust-up with Gregor Townsend. The fly half says the move is testament to how much his relationship with Townsend has grown.
Going back to 2020, you wouldn't have picked me as captain 3 or 4 years later, would you? So I think it shows where we've both come and how we've both changed and adapted off the back of that situation. You know, these things happen. That's, you know, high pressure environments when things aren't potentially going as planned. A bust up happened, and that's kind of all it was. And you know, I think 6 months after, we're back on good terms.
And that is all your sport from a cold and windy Easter Road.
Ronnie, thank you. That was his forecast. What's Philip saying?
An icy start to the day will give way to a series of oohs and ahs. TUI sponsors STV Weather.
Hello and a very good evening to you. Well, throughout today we've seen Storm Jocelyn pushing away to the northeast, clearing out across parts of Scandinavia. It took a while for the eyes of ours to open up though, so it did remain quite breezy and gusty through the course of the afternoon. Tonight, things turn calmer with the arrival of high pressure, but for the rest of the week, it's a constant stream of frontal systems moving in from the west, bringing with it bands of rain and showers. Like I said, as we head through this evening, we're seeing high pressure building in from the southwest, so that's helping to clear a lot of today's blustery showers. So gradually it will be turning drier overnight. We've got those light winds now, clear skies. We could see a touch of frost forming, and also some mist and fog patches, with temperatures for most towns and cities getting down to the low single figures. But in those rural spots, we could see temperatures just getting down below freezing. Now, looking ahead to tomorrow morning, the dry conditions don't last very long, as first thing we'll see the arrival of this next frontal system. That brings with it outbreaks of rain. As that rain hits the slightly colder air, it will be falling as snow initially, but mostly on higher ground. Very quickly though, it turns back to rain, and that's because we're in a southwesterly airflow dragging in milder air. So a grey, damp, dreary afternoon to come for many of us, unfortunately, but it will be feeling slightly milder with highs of 11 or 12 degrees Celsius. Bye-bye.
TUI sponsors STV Weather.
Well, that is all from us for the moment, but we'll be back tomorrow at 6.
From all of us here, thank you for watching. Have a good night.
Good night.